Hello and welcome to this Lit in 5 video on language in The Great Gatsby. I've had to split this into a two-part language video, basically because I have so much to say and talk to you about in terms of the brilliant The Great Gatsby. So this language video will focus on 3 of the 5 areas of language, those being materialism, social mobility and desire. These first 3 happen to be, in my opinion, the ones most suited if you're studying AQA's A syllabus of Love Through the Ages. That doesn't mean to say they aren't applicable if you're studying The Great Gatsby in general, but it just happens to have fallen that way. So please check out the other video on car imagery or car metaphors and the language used in the presentation of female characters. That is language video part 2. Okay, on we go. So let's introduce the 5 areas of language we're going to look at in this video. First of all, materialism, which you'll see highlighted throughout in this colour, yellow. And when we're looking at materialism, we're concerned with how people are presented, or characters are presented as objects or commodities by Fitzgerald. Also within that, or stemming from that really, is the idea of rivalry and competition for these objects. This rivalry and competition for these people/objects is what poses as love in inverted commas in this novel. So I'm kind of raising that because many people study this for the AQA A syllabus of Love Through the Ages. However, even if you're not studying that syllabus or that specification, that's still a relevant point to make from Fitzgerald's satirical presentation of these characters. The second language area relates to social mobility, which will be highlighted in blue throughout this analysis. If you've listened to the video on context, if you haven't, then please check that out. You'll hear some stuff there about America at the time and Fitzgerald's depiction or his version of America at that time, and you'll see why social mobility is such a big concern. So check that video out and then you'll have greater contextual understanding of all the stuff on social mobility here. Our third language area relates to desire, deliberately put in green here as we'll be looking at green lights and whatnot. This is focused on how desire is often excessive. Again, see the context video for discussion of the jazz age here and hedonism. So desire taken to excess, but there's also a second idea here of intangibility and, more importantly, unobtainability. So we're going to see many affluent characters, and even though they have more money than you could shake a stick at, desire and satisfaction remains elusive and out of reach, particularly relating to the area of love and satisfaction and happiness within love, in spite of, or perhaps because of, all of the wealth on show. Language area number 4 will relate to some car metaphors or car imagery, which occurs throughout the novel, which is linked to the jazz age. Again, see the context video. And finally, we have a close language analysis of Fitzgerald's presentation of female characters. So there are 3 on show there. Again, we've started to raise some of these ideas in the context video, but we'll zoom in more specifically with close language analysis for this area. I thought I'd do a quick table just to reiterate those 5 areas and the 5 contextual areas I mentioned in the context video, and how these language areas speak to these contextual areas. On the left here you can also see how the colour-coded ones, the yellow, blue and the green, I think are most relevant. There's nothing to say 4 and 5 can't be relevant either to the AQA focus of Love Through the Ages. So if you are following that specification and you are looking at Gatsby for that exam board, the stuff in the colours will be a bit more prominent for you to see as we go through these videos. Let me just reiterate what I always say at this stage, that even though I identify 5 language areas, they can, of course, and they do, interrelate. So if I'm looking at a particular quote in relation to social mobility, there's no reason at all why you can't see that as speaking to the female characters and what's typical of them in the novel. So even though these areas are separated in a table, please understand they're sort of multi-purpose and can be used for many of these 5 areas at once. Moving on. Okay, so let's start to illustrate those first 3 language areas we identified, the ones that are colour-coded. So I've identified some stuff here also to establish one of many structural parallels across the novel. I guess I could have put this in the structure video, but I've gone for some other stuff there as well. So we'll look at language and structure here in a sense. So here's a structural parallel between 2 of the female characters. As we said in the context video, it's a pretty condemnatory presentation of the female characters in the novel, as attracted to wealth, very shallow and superficial. So here we have a moment from chapter 2 where Myrtle and Tom first set eyes upon each other. And Myrtle notes that he, Tom, had on a dress suit and patent leather shoes, and I couldn't keep my eyes off him. I had to pretend to be looking at the advertisement over his head. Then a little bit further on we get his white shirt front pressed against my arm. Okay, so what we're seeing here is the idea of Myrtle falling in love, in inverted commas, or having amorous desire towards Tom based on his appearance and the wealth and the affluence which is on show in terms of his clothing. The reason why we've highlighted the stuff in blue here, I couldn't keep my eyes off him, and the advertisement over his head. We're looking at the idea of social mobility here. So what Fitzgerald is showing here is that a major factor in Myrtle's desire towards Tom is the fact he symbolically represents a higher social class, the higher social class she is so desperate to belong to in an era where social mobility and social climbing is possible, in the same way as you look at an advert or open a catalogue yourself to look at all the nice things that you aspire to have or want. This is at the core of Myrtle's desire towards Tom Buchanan. Now leap forward a few chapters and we have chapter 7, that really tense chapter when the love triangle and the friction between the 2 men and Daisy really starts to come to the fore in a chapter filled with heat imagery and the reference to Daisy dropping a match or maybe a cigarette on the carpet, just to add to that idea of something incendiary and about to explode. So a really tense chapter. So the parallel, again, between these 2 women is this one. His mouth opened a little. This is where Daisy starts to openly flirt and express her desire towards Gatsby in front of her husband, Tom. And she pays Gatsby this compliment in front of her husband. "You resemble the advertisement of the man," she went on innocently, not so innocently really. "You know, the advertisement of the man." "All right," broke in Tom quickly, and then there's that crackling tension here as well. So the parallel we're interested in here, which relates to materialism and seeing other characters as commodities or a lifestyle they wish to achieve. Both of the women refer to their extramarital partners through that language of materialism and commodification, because their extramarital partners represent freedom and a way of acting upon excessive desire. Please have a listen to the context video in terms of the importance of advertising during this period as well. Just a little mention of the green stuff here as well in relation to Tom. We're talking about desire and self-control. Tom is a character who is appalling in terms of impulses and desires. He's frequently adulterous. There are suggestions of it during their honeymoon as well, which we'll look at later. But you can see here Tom's temper cracked a little, and he's trembling with his effort at self-control. Not something that's big in The Great Gatsby amongst their characters. Self-control, we'll talk about a little bit in terms of car imagery as well later on, which is symbolic of the Jazz Age. Okay, second area of paralleling throughout the novel here, it relates to leash, collar and necklace symbolism. Now, I've never come across any analysis of this in any criticism or critical material upon The Great Gatsby, so this may open your eyes to a new aspect or a new angle. See what you think of this. Basically, it stems from this line. It's a line that Tom Buchanan uses in relation to Jordan Baker. Tom says Jordan has a nice family and they oughtn't to let her run around like that. So run around evokes the idea of freedom and liberty. Jordan is probably the best fit to embody the idea of the flapper from the 1920s in Fitzgerald's novel. But I suppose with a character like Tom Buchanan, run around is a negative quality. Jordan should be restrained and controlled. And this is where we get the idea of leash and collar and necklace symbolism, which I'll illustrate now for you. Just listening to that back, I need to mention the utter hypocrisy of Tom's view here, of course. Whilst he's frowning upon women who run around, the increased sexual freedoms and behaviours of the flapper girl of the 1920s, he's obviously frowning upon that and criticising it. Tom, of course, as a man, is extremely guilty of running around. Numerous hints of adultery and extramarital relationships, other women outside of his relationship to Daisy Fay / Buchanan when she becomes his wife, even suggestions of adultery during their honeymoon. So utter gendered hypocrisy from a disgusting character like Tom Buchanan. I suppose the idea we're getting at here is that is this point, that Tom's money, his dollars, his money, his wealth, is frequently involved in purchasing these symbols of restraint and control towards women to prevent their running around. If we're getting down to really sort of coarse language and the disgusting idea underneath all of this is that we're seeing women presented as dogs, really, in a sort of animal sense, in the sense that they are to be mastered, controlled, they're to be put on a leash, they're to be tamed, they're not to be allowed to be stray or strays. Sort of the dog catcher going around and catching and rounding up stray dogs. They are to be controlled. Now let's tie that all back to money, okay? So, as we'll see now, Tom's money has a hand in purchasing all of these symbols of restraint and control to essentially put women on a leash. So let's start looking at this leash, collar, necklace symbolism across the novel. Look at the structure video. There's some good stuff in there about further patternings and connections across the novel, so that's useful to check that out. But as you can see here, we're going to scan across the novel in terms of chapters 2, 4, 8 and 9 in relation to this symbolism. Okay, so let's start to explore this in terms of Myrtle Wilson in chapter 2. So let's look at the yellow stuff first, relating to materialism. So this bit from chapter 2, Myrtle declares in her dialogue here, I want to get one of those dogs, she said earnestly. I can always hear Myrtle's accent as that broad sort of Manhattan, New York accent. I want to get one of those dogs, she said earnestly. Sorry, but that's the voice I hear in my head when I think about Myrtle Wilson. And then we see how she gathered up her dog and her other purchases. So the dog is an item, it is an object to be acquired in order to, as we'll look at in the blue stuff in a moment, meet the expectations of a certain lifestyle, of a certain social class. So I want to get one of those dogs, and then we move further down. She's coming out with another list of yet more items or purchases she feels she needs to acquire. Materialism and commodification gone mad. All the things I've got to get. A massage and a wave and a collar for the dog. And then the list continues. So Fitzgerald sets up this idea in an early chapter of collar and restraint around the dog and Myrtle's acquisition of these through Tom's money. As mentioned then, this is quite satirical and extremely misogynist, of course, in terms of the idea that money acquires or secures, or in a way puts a leash on, Tom's latest partner or other woman. Well, I don't want to use the dog word for a female dog, but I think this idea is circling underneath this. To reinforce that deeply unpleasant and disgusting interpretation, that implied presentation of women as female dogs, when Tom is buying this dog from the vendor on the street corner or wherever it is, we have the vendor saying, That dog's a boy. It's a bitch, said Tom decisively. Here's your money, go and buy 10 more dogs with it. So, very hypocritical that Tom resents being exploited by profit making, given how affluent and, the crazy levels of money Tom Buchanan has. However, I think that is a satirical presentation there of Tom and his adultery, and how Tom's money enables him to, quote unquote, buy 10 more dogs or mistresses with it. It will always enable the purchase of other or extra women beyond Daisy Fay / Buchanan, with whom he cannot be satisfied or content. Let's follow this strand through when we look at chapter 4 and move across to chapter 8 and 9 as well, just to establish this as a pattern which occurs across the novel. So from chapter 4 here, we have the flashback, more on that in the structure video in terms of the sequence and the non-linear pattern of the story or the narrative. And we get told that the day before the wedding, Tom, gave her, Daisy, who's having cold feet, she's having regrets, she becomes drunk, starts having doubts, gave her a string of pearls valued at $350,000. Now, again, I'm not an expert on inflation, but that's an incredible sum of money for the 1920s, 1930s America. So that's incredible wealth. But what I'm asking you to consider is, and Fitzgerald is asking you to consider as well, is there much difference, monetary value aside, between the braided silver leash Tom enables Myrtle to buy for her dog, compared to the $350,000 necklace Tom gives to the wavering Daisy Fay, who's worrying and wondering whether she's doing the right thing in marrying Tom Buchanan. On that note, have a look at the second quote, please. We gave her spirits of ammonia, ice on her forehead, and hooked her back into her dress. Now, I'm not an expert on fastenings in wedding dresses, but the idea of hooked certainly has connotations of snaring or containing or capturing Daisy Fay. Plenty more about that when we look at the presentation of women later on in this video, but that's an interesting verb with its connotations. Then, half an hour later, the pearls were around her neck and the incident was over. So, I think Fitzgerald wants you to see how quickly and how easily. I was always going to say cheaply. It sounds wrong to say that in terms of a $350,000 necklace, but I suppose with the wealth Tom has, that still doesn't entirely break the bank for him, one imagines. But money is the fix. Money is the means to remove any doubt Daisy has, and she consents. And there we go, she's married. The incident was over like it was a flash in the pan, resolved with an expensive piece of jewellery. And then also note here, she married Tom Buchanan without so much as a shiver, and started off on a 3-month trip to the South Seas. So that whisking her away, further expenditure and travel and restlessness, which we look at in terms of desire, before she can have any more wobbles or doubts or worries about whether she's doing the right thing. Right, quickly, off we go, spend, visit, move, restlessness. Interesting connection, I think, between the silver necklace and the $350,000 pearl necklace used to secure and hook, if you like, Daisy Fay. These last two quotes here are obviously reinforcing this kind of motif that runs throughout it in terms of collars and leashes. Chapter 8, Michaelis opened the drawer, and we are shown the dog leash made of leather and braided silver. So again, you've got ideas of not exorbitant or crazy wealth. Silver is obviously not the same value as pearls, but it still has connotations of cheaper money. So he can spend less money on his mistress from a working class background than he does his real target or intention, who is Daisy Fay, but the principle remains the same, that you spend on expensive or inexpensive, gaudy, sort of wealthy looking items, and the woman is yours. She is snared, she is hooked, she is yours on a leash to control and own and master. Chapter 9 has a little reference to this as well. This is just to remind you of Tom's complicity and guilt in all of this, but as Nick says through Fitzgerald, or Fitzgerald has Nick note, they're careless people, the Buchanans. They retreat into their money. So there's Tom scolding Gatsby. The fellow had it coming to him. He threw dust into your eyes just like he did in Daisy's, but he was a tough one. He ran over Myrtle like you'd run over a dog. And there, I think, is our final reference to that idea which runs throughout this novel in terms of the presentation of women and the relationship between money and, in inverted commas, love. Of course, Myrtle didn't run over Gatsby didn't run over Myrtle. We know it was Daisy, but Gatsby takes the blame for that. Just in that chapter as well, a quote I haven't added, the last little sort of barbed comment from Nick Carraway towards Tom. I shook hands with him. It seemed silly not to, for I felt suddenly as though I were talking to a child. Then he went into the jewellery store to buy a pearl necklace, or perhaps only a pair of cuff buttons, rid of my provincial squeamishness forever. So there's the suggestion that an unrepentant Tom Buchanan is a way to find either something to soothe Daisy, yet another pearl necklace to smooth all this over, as though money makes every problem go away, the fact that she's killed another woman, and we never hear about her feelings or thoughts on that in the novel ever again. Or, I don't know, you might even think that it's for Tom's latest mistress. Very hard to prove that, because we don't have another encounter where Tom is looking seedily at another woman, but I think there's ample scope, given that presentation of desire and inability to be satisfied and content with what you currently have. There's ample scope to suggest that, I think. Let's quickly look at the content in blue here in relation to Myrtle and the idea of social mobility. So we have here mentions to an indeterminate breed, and then a quick reference to breeding in relation to poor George Wilson. So a bit more in the way of satirical symbolism here, and yes, again, it's linked to that very unpleasant idea of women as dogs. So an indeterminate breed in terms of dogs and breeding, I suppose the natural opposite is a pure breed, so something that is pure Corgi or pure Labrador, as opposed to a mongrel, which is a mixture of different breeds and different types. So again, deeply unpleasant, but The satirical suggestion here seems to be that Myrtle is neither working class nor is she moneyed. She falls in between. She is an indeterminate breed of working class background, but she's not entirely that, as she is afforded the lifestyle of someone or something slightly higher than that through the old money wealth of her lover, her adulterous lover, Tom Buchanan. We discuss a critical view later of social climbers in this novel and how Gatsby, a social climber, starts from humble origins, rag to riches, and Myrtle Wilson, social climber, humble origins, rags to riches, share a similar fate. So we'll explore that later, but it's worth noticing the use of this sort of dog breeding imagery in relation to social climbers, and of course consider their fate. The arc or trajectory for their character within the narrative. Now, two of these quotes in blue could easily have been yellow, I guess. Remember I said they're interrelated and exchangeable, these sort of colourings, but let's look at these two. I want to get one of those dogs for the apartment. They're nice to have a dog. And then later on we get in a bit of dialogue, I'm going to make a list of all the things I've got to get. I've got to write down a list so I won't forget all the things I gotta do. So I want to notice here how things I've got to get, things I've got to do. Now there's only one word difference there between get and do, but this is why equally it could be yellow. Look at how much doing, her existence, her day-to-day life, has become interchangeable with or indistinguishable from getting. So in the context video we had that sort of pun on Descartes' notion of I think therefore I am, I shop therefore I am. Look at Myrtle here. Her purpose, her reason for being is to get. Her doing is getting. Spend, 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 buy, 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 consume, consume, consume. We'll say more on that later when we look at the very important description of Myrtle, or Myrtle's body, really, after she's hit by the car. So that's very symbolic later on. Also look back up the top here, please. I want to get one for the apartment. They're nice to have a dog. Now, look at how the animal is being represented as an acquisition, a must-have item. So when you become a homeowner, or if you rent a flat, you put your own individual stamp on it through your decor, the nice dining table you have, the lovely sort of cushions that you wish to have. There's a living thing being described as an item, an accessory to convey a certain lifestyle. So have apartment, must have dog. As though it's incomplete or unfinished without the requisite dog to complete it. Of course, no one or nothing is ever complete or satisfied in this novel in terms of desire. You may remember a few years back the trend and the fashion to have a tiny dog, poor little thing, cradled inside a handbag, and your dog as your accessory, the must-have item. Dearie me, levels of shallowness and superficiality hit record highs or lows, depending on your point of view. Also notice here how Myrtle changes. We can see that physically. She has a number of changes of her dress. Fitzgerald is almost likening that to a costume change. More on that later when we look at Myrtle. But look at how haughty, H-A-U-G-H-T-Y, Myrtle becomes. She becomes snobby and superior. She starts discussing the help and how you've got to keep on top of these people, and all of a sudden she's in command of people who are, strictly speaking, at the same social level. She is the wife of a garage mechanic, so they are of the same social class. But with Tom's money, she can all of a sudden start talking down to them, throwing a regal homecoming glance around the neighbourhood. Myrtle is not regal, but the dress, the affectations, the mannerisms of belonging, no matter how false or insincere that is, to a higher social class, she becomes superior and snobby, regal almost. So let's speed things up looking at these colour-coded approaches to some language throughout the chapters, so shorter, quicker examples now. One thing I do want to note as we go through is that I'm trying to highlight to you how the language of money absolutely saturates description of relationships in this novel. And here's one of the first examples. So from chapter 1, there's some description of the powerful sort of body, physically strong Tom Buchanan is, muscle, etc., etc. And then we see it was a body capable of enormous leverage, a cruel body. Undoubtedly true, there's no way you can dispute the cruelty of Tom Buchanan. So as well as sort of having a strength and physics sort of connotation here, the action of a lever, you can move heavier things by the sort of physics of using a lever to propel it forward, the power to accomplish something. Tom is immensely powerful in terms of his body size and his wealth, of course. It's the third definition here from the dictionary that we're interested in, because I want to show you these patterns of monetary language inextricably woven with references to money, acquisition, finance and wealth. So I'm not a finance expert, but to leverage something in sort of the financial world is the use of debt, borrowed capital, in order to undertake an investment or a project. It involves risk. The result is to multiply the potential returns from a project. So you invest borrowed money, has some risk, to make further money. A risky investment, if you like. At the same time, leverage will also multiply the potential downside risk in case the investment does not pan out. So what investments are we seeing? Well, we've just seen the previous slide showing that pattern that Tom Buchanan has to spend in order to acquire. Now, I wouldn't say it's borrowed money. In a way you can. He's owed money, it's inherited. But his stake, if you like, his spending with a bid to secure something further or more or extra, we've seen it. It's whatever frivolous items Myrtle wants to acquire. Sure, here you go, here's some money, knock yourself out, go buy it, you're mine. Daisy Faye, uncertain about whether she should marry Tom. Right, go and get me a $350,000 necklace. She's mine. Secured her, let's go travelling and make her head spin before she can reflect or have any more regrets. So Tom does leverage, especially in his attitude towards women, and the key role of money within that. Throughout these remaining slides, I want to point you towards keywords. They'll be highlighted for you on the screen, don't worry, but as an initial heads up, I want you to look for words that fit within this semantic field of monetary value and how relationships are sort of mired or corrupted by the language of money and wealth. So we'll have words like monopolize. If you played the game Monopoly, the board game, you'll know it's to dominate and control and corner the market. Engrossed. So a gross is 144. So a little sort of scratch away at that word. You can hear monetary or amounts in there. And you'll also see increased hair value. Enchanted objects. Fitzgerald is brilliant at scattering these monetary words, but I've highlighted them for you and you will see them on our travels. Moving on. More on Tom Buchanan here in relation to desire and materialism. I've got a nice place here, he said. His eyes flashing about restlessly. So that adverb restlessly, frequently used in relation to Tom Buchanan, but it's a characteristic shared by Gatsby. Look at the structuring video. And although the adverb might not be used explicitly about the female characters, there is a restlessness about the affluent, moneyed characters in this novel. They are never content. Desire and satisfaction cannot be achieved. It is always elusive and fleeting and incapable of completion. A great juxtaposition there as well. In the same breath as he seemingly expresses satisfaction, I've got a nice place here. In a way, that sentence should end and have a full stop. But Fitzgerald undermines that through his narrator Nick. He said, his eyes flashing about restlessly. It's almost like, right, I have a nice place, what else can I acquire? This is not enough. What is my next target, goal or objective to acquire and obtain? Very interesting juxtaposition, but also really good psychological insight into the mind of these moneyed characters. Maybe it's shallow and superficial of me, but I don't know about you, but just for once, one of my 50 things to do before I die, I would like to stand in a half acre of deep, pungent, strong-scented roses, just to say I have. It's not high up there on my list of things, but look at the wealth the Buchanans have. A half acre of roses? My goodness, we're talking serious wealth here. Okay, that was a little aside, but let's get back onto the yellow stuff here. So we notice a motorboat, and Tom says it belonged to Domain, the oil man. So if you're an oil baron, you tend to have a tremendous amount of wealth. However, it's not the object. Tom could easily have, one imagines, bought a brand new motorboat. Could have bought 10, could have bought 15, probably. However, what we're getting at here is the rivalry and competition underneath that. The motorboat didn't belong to Tim the baker or Maureen the cleaner. It belonged to an oil man. That is now Tom's. Okay, so another pattern, structural pattern, see the structure video, we'll see, is the thrill of the chase, the importance of the rivalry, and the victory over a fellow rich rival. If you're being psychological about it, the pursuit, the chase, and the victory is more thrilling once the object itself is obtained. We're going to see the word anticlimax soon. It is anticlimactic. So I have a motorboat that, I don't know, to a normal person, define normal, that should be the thrilling thing, arguably, getting to go around in the beautiful sun on a motorboat. However, that's almost disappointing. I have won the victory over a rich competitor and rival. Who next? What next? The object becomes immaterial. It is more to do with the victory and the conquest. Now, we're going to take that and look at the love triangle between Daisy, Tom and Gatsby, to the point where Daisy becomes almost immaterial, might be a deliberate pun implied by Fitzgerald, compared to winning and defeating your rich male rival. More on that later. Okay, materialism and social climbing, social mobility through Myrtle here, all of which, as we've mentioned, is afforded by Tom's wealth. So let's have a little contextual influence here as well. So Myrtle buys a copy of Town Tattle, I guess the 1920s equivalent of OK magazine or Hello magazine. I don't know if they're still going, I don't want to know, they're awful things. But Myrtle buys a moving picture magazine. So we're getting the birth of the cinema here. They've had silent films before this, but now technologically this era is advancing to what are called the talkies, so you can hear an actor and actress's voice. You get the birth of the movie star, and Hollywood in a way, its first sort of advent of the golden age of cinema comes in the 20s and the 30s. We're seeing from that then the worship of beauty. So Myrtle buys some cold cream, moisturiser and a small flask of perfume. These are veneers. We are seeing how the concept of beauty is desirable. It can be purchased. So, you turn on the television these days, every third advert could be for makeup or aftershave or some cosmetic thing or some dietary aid. We're starting to see this for the first time in Fitzgerald's jazz era of the 1920s. With money, Tom's money, Myrtle's haughtiness, trying to get comfortable using that word, comes to the fore. So she doesn't want any old taxi cab. She lets 4 drive away before she selected. Look at that active verb. She has the power of choice now as a moneyed consumer. She selected a new one. What else? Nothing else is good enough for the standard Myrtle now operates at. Lavender coloured with grey upholstery. So we've done a lot of work on looking at the references to advertisement and how both men are described by Myrtle and Daisy, complementary in a flattering way in relation to adverts. So we are operating at higher social levels now. We are more discerning and choosy and judgmental in terms of what we desire due to money. Second part of the quote here, here's Myrtle's disgust, yet another of Fitzgerald's female characters who are disgusted with the idea of poverty in the men they fall in love with or desire or choose as their life partner. Very shallow, very superficial. We've seen that with Judy Jones and Evelyn from the Cut Glass Bowl, and of course we see it here with Myrtle Wilson. So her disgust, he borrowed somebody's best suit to get married in, and how dare he never even told me about it. So this is Myrtle's justification for her adultery, one imagines. I was deceived. I was the victim of fraud by a working class man posing as something higher on his wedding day than he actually is. Again, I think Fitzgerald wants you to observe the hypocrisy here. Is Myrtle who she actually is? We're looking at these veneers earlier. Cold cream is another layer put upon your face to try and preserve beauty. Perfume, I'm not saying Myrtle needs a wash, but perfume is another veneer which covers up and masks who you really are, your true scent, or who you are, your identity, if you like. So there's not a lot of difference. There would be no difference, if you wish to argue that, in terms of George Wilson borrowing a suit to appear more respectable on his wedding day, of all days, compared to Myrtle aspiring to be like or closer to one of the screen sirens of Hollywood with her cold cream and her small flask. Very useful section here from chapter 4 where Gatsby opens up to Nick, and we get Gatsby's version, at least, filtered through Nick's narration of Gatsby's uprising, if you like, his rise from rags to riches. So he's telling Nick of his past. After that, I lived like a young Raja in all the capitals of Europe, an Indian prince, Paris, Venice, Rome, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game, etc., etc. So, in terms of the blue stuff here, there's your social mobility. So, he is not the humble soldier who only had his uniform. He is transforming and repackaging himself, rebranding himself, a new identity. Look at the context video for that, please. As a young Indian prince. Materialism, clearly on show here, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game. So this definitely gets us to the idea of trophies and objects and goals and items through which these characters gain life purpose in pursuing and acquiring these goals. Again, there's another parallel you can observe. Tom Buchanan successfully gaining the motorboat from a rich rival. Exactly the same with the young Jay Gatsby. So for jewels, rubies and big game, we can easily substitute one Daisy Faye / Buchanan. As you'll see here, there's a later reference, which I'll talk about and show you, to Daisy as a grail, a quest, an object to be acquired and gained for your own sort of ego and victory over your male rival. The notion of love with Daisy, either whether you're Tom or Jay Gats or Gatsby, arguably doesn't exist. When each of those men have or possess or obtain Daisy, there's anti-climax. There is not satisfaction or a happy ever after tale for each of those men. So we're getting towards the point that the victory over each other psychologically is actually the thing which drives these men, which brings true, inverted commas, happiness, if you can use that term in relation to these restless, moneyed people. With that in mind, have a look at these two verbs in green, collecting and hunting. So they absolutely prove those claims and that argument and that interpretation we've just made about the thrill of the chase being more thrilling than the acquisition of the item / person they're interchangeable. Of Daisy, one she is acquired, and if you like her, then you should have put a pearl necklace on her, etc. So, moving on. So we've already looked at some of this stuff from chapter 4 down the bottom here, the string of pearls and hooked, etc. I just thought I'd reproduce a larger section of that chapter. This very important flashback, one day in 1917, said Jordan Baker. If we look closely at the top here, before we get to the string of pearls section, I mean, I don't even have to read the entire paragraph. Look at all the stuff in yellow in terms of materialism and excess. I'll just read them in isolation. This is Tom obviously splashing the cash. Don't say that in your essay, that's awful expression. The largest, the most popular. Look at those superlatives. Largest, most. Then we get comparative adjectives, more pomp, language of quantities and amounts, 100 people, 4 private car, whole floor, and then the reference to the string of pearls, $350,000. Tremendous money. Okay, so there's that idea that we see represented in the hardly ever quoted opening epigram to the novel. So here it is popping up now, reproduced for you on the side here. It's a brilliant quote that gets to the heart of much of the novel. Obviously you read that and it's the first thing you read and you think, what's all that about? It's chapter 1, let's get started. But rereading it, the benefit of studying literature of course, you can see how useful this is. So it goes, then wear the gold hat, if that will move her. So money, dollars, wealth, gold, to impress the girl. If you can bounce high, bounce for her too, till she cry, lover, gold-hatted, high-bouncing lover, I must have you. Okay, so yet again, not a complimentary view of women. Their desire is piqued or aroused when they can see that you are gold-hatted and that you will bounce high for her. In other words, make yourself an idiot, look a fool, a rich idiot and fool bouncing up and down with a gold hat. I don't know, would even the Kardashians wear a gold hat and look that stupid and cheap and shallow? Maybe, perhaps. Sorry if you're a Kardashian fan. So put that gold hat on. If it will move her, bounce as high as you possibly can, till, look at that sort of adverb there, until, the causality of that will cause her to be desirous towards you. I must have you. Put yourself on show. It goes back to sort of nature, I guess, and peacock feathers, or those glowworms or jitterbugs whose bottom light up to attract a mate. In fact, that's how Gatsby's house is often described, as being sort of glowworm, jitterbug kind of creature, which was a dance in the 1920s, a style of jazz music, in order to attract fair maiden, fair, avaricious, gold-digging maiden, if you're in Fitzgerald's world of fiction. And there, being highlighted for you now, is one of those zingers, one of those brilliant words Fitzgerald has chosen. The younger soldiers courting or attempting to court or woo or lure in the beautiful, apparently, Daisy Fay. All day long the telephone rang in her house, and excited young officers from Camp Taylor demanded the privilege of monopolising her that night. Anyways, for an hour. So time is money, but according to Gatsby, money is time, the chance to turn back time. Why, of course you can, old sport, of course you can turn back the clock. That memorable quote we see in chapter 5. But please look at that monetary acquisition language, one of many brilliant ones that Fitzgerald uses, monopolising her. Speaking of bright things to attract women through wealth and displays of wealth, all the yellow stuff here. Gatsby bought that house so Daisy would be, come to the green stuff in a moment, dispensed starlight to casual moths. Moths and fluttering is something regularly associated with female characters of beauty in this novel. More on that in the women part of the video. All the references to light and fire here as well. His house blazed gaudily on fire, blazing with light, glints lit from tower to cellar. So let's go back to our gold-hatted bouncing Glover, who looks ridiculous because he's wearing a gold hat and bouncing up and down. There's this idea of a beacon to lure in. Even the car, we'll see later as well, has sunlight bouncing off it, and it's yellow, for goodness sake. It's to attract attention, the attention of the one, Daisy. So there's that idea of golden wealth with conspicuous consumption. Check out the context video, used to lure in Daisy Faye. The two green quotes in terms of desire here are very important. Daisy will be just across the bay. So I want to focus on those two words, just across, out of reach, just beyond the grasp or the attainment of. So by the end of chapter 5, Gatsby in essence does obtain or attain Daisy Faye. Daisy Buchanan, sorry, beg your pardon. But he doesn't obtain her or attain her in some way, as we'll see when we look closely. That idea of desire and satisfaction being unreachable or unobtainable, or intangible as well, when we start to look at light imagery. Can you capture light? If you're better at me than science, you might say yes you can, in the form of a photograph or this, that and the other. Don't go that scientific or clever. It is unobtainable. It cannot be reached or grasped. It eludes your grasp or your fingers. We get this bit here, on that note, we get, then it had not been merely the stars to which he had aspired on that June night. Again, capture stars, capture heat and light. They appear extremely close because you can see them, but again, I'm not brilliant at astrophysics. The stars we see are actually an enormous distance away. So there's sort of a foreshadowing, really, but also a very important insight into that idea of unobtainable objects of desire. Chapter 5 is obviously an important, really important chapter in terms of the story, the reunion between Gatsby and Daisy. However, the key thing we're looking at here with our language focus is the idea of how wealth consumes the rich. Alright, so maybe we'd like the chance to find out how unsatisfying and unfulfilling having lorry loads of money is, but Fitzgerald, through Gatsby and Tom and everyone else, I guess, shows the negative side of this, shows how wealth rots you from within, leads you to become hollow, shallow, insubstantial, and so on and so forth. So let's look at Gatsby here. He is literally, I suppose you could say metaphorically, covered in money, like that idea we saw from the Wolf of Wall Street image. Silver shirt, a gold coloured tie. But look at the stuff in red here early on. Pale, sleeplessness beneath his eyes. Look at the toll, how consumed and rotten from within Gatsby has become in his pursuit, his years, his obsessive quest to obtain his genuine ruby or treasure or game, from that quote earlier of Daisy. Some quite gothic notes here from Fitzgerald. So, vacant eyes. He stared around at his possessions in a dazed way. This is an almost out-of-body experience. Pale, sleeplessness, dark, vacant eyes. As he's there, quite awkward and feeling embarrassed and nervous, Gatsby looked with vacant eyes through a copy of Clay's Economics. So there he is, reading a finance journal or newspaper, whatever it is. He is addicted to the notion of wealth and acquisition, and he looks terrible for that, as Fitzgerald shows here. A further little clever symbolic structuring device here to show that Daisy and people, but more so Daisy, are actual items and objects to be possessed. A damp streak of hair lay like a dash of blue paint across her cheek. Don't ask me how hair can be blue. I have no idea. That's part of the sort of experimental modernist sort of approach that Fitzgerald uses. But if they're getting a dash of blue paint, have a little look on the side there. Some dim impulse moved the policeman to look suspiciously at Tom. And what colour's your car? It's a blue car, a coupe. So a little reminder of sort of almost like branding her possession and ownership again. Some clever colour symbolism to reinforce that idea of possession and control here. That idea of wealth consuming the rich as well, I forgot to mention that simile, pale as death, quite an obvious one. It's this little section here just after that I also want to focus in. This is quite a signature move or signature characterisation of Gatsby here. I think it's maybe 3 times, could be more, happy to be proven wrong, that we get told that Gatsby has his hands in his pockets. So here it's with his hands plunged like weights, may foreshadow how he meets his fate at the end of the novel, which is something that sinks you or drags you to the bottom. Plunged like weights in his coat pockets. I think that's a repeated reference to evoke his origins, his humble origins, a down at heel, penniless young soldier with nothing but his uniform. So the hands in pockets gesture could be seen, in my view, as a reference towards his penniless origins, as hands in his pockets with nothing to pull out of them, empty pockets, and that rags to riches rise, but then also the fall that comes after that rise. All these items he acquired becomes revalued according to the measure, still monetary language, of amounts and quantities, of the response it drew from her well-loved eyes. Now we'll see a later quote where Daisy becomes extra or more desirable to the young J. Gats because many other men have pursued her and tried to obtain her. So we're back to that idea of the thrill of the quest and the conquest, and gaining Daisy as a victory, a sort of male ego boost and egocentrism because they've defeated their rivals. So well loved. Still, I guess you could say that hints towards amounts and quantities. Someone has been loved, someone has been more loved, someone has been most loved. So there's that thrill of acquisition and victory because many other competitors have been defeated. And then we get a broken Gatsby. Look at this stuff in red here. He's broken. Don't put that in your essay, but if Gatsby was a computer, you'd need Control, Alt and Delete. He is broken. It's the funniest thing, Girl Sport, he said hilariously. He's almost sort of hysterical here. I can't... When I tried to... And all of that incomplete dialogue, he is beside himself. He is broken and hysterical. I guess it's because he has the girl of his dreams, the woman the grail he has pursued. She is actually there now, marvelling at all his expensive, ridiculous, useless baubles and items he has collected. I mean, seriously, who needs a hairbrush of pure dull gold? I think there's the satire there. Does a gold hairbrush not do the same as a wooden hairbrush? I don't know, but this is maybe what Fitzgerald is getting at, the absurdity of this. And then we see how he passed visibly through 2 states and was entering upon a third. After his embarrassment earlier, unreasoning joy, he was consumed. Another brilliant word, definitely relating to that monetary semantic field. With the green stuff on desire, we're already hinting at this idea of dissatisfaction and anticlimax, which is a word in the novel, so be comfortable using it if you're making this point. Gatsby is in a dazed way, as though in her actual and astounding presence, none of it was any longer real. So there's anticlimax. In a way, could the acquisition of Daisy ever live up to or meet or match the years of acquiring wealth and the pursuit of it? Something is bound to be a bit anticlimactic. Maybe finishing your A-levels, or finishing your degree, or finishing a 20,000 piece jigsaw, or whatever it is you do. Once you put in that final piece, or once you've finished your last A-level exam, it might be a sense of, oh, that's that then. That sense of anticlimax. Maybe that's a human thing, I'm not sure. Down the bottom here, he had been full of the idea so long, dreamed it right through to the end, waited with his teeth set, so to speak, at an inconceivable pitch of intensity. Now he was like an overwound clock, So some very important imagery there in terms of anticlimax related to desire, which is impossible to fulfill or meet expectations. Our desire ideas are most perfectly illustrated here in these quotes, I think. Colossal, again, you could look at that in terms of amounts of that light had vanished forever. Again, how easily captured can light be? Don't go all photographic and scientifically intelligent on me. I think that's not the idea Fitzgerald would want you to talk about. Great distance, separated, very near, but actually very far away. Almost qualified there with that adverb, almost touching her. Now it was again a green light on a dock. His count of enchanted objects had diminished or reduced by one. He literally has Daisy there next to him. They are touching later on. They are linking arms, I think. He literally has Daisy Faye / Buchanan. She is Buchanan. He thinks he's getting Daisy Faye. But it is anticlimactic, diminished. Look at enchanted in terms of realism and not genuine. It's mythical almost. Objects absolutely gets towards the idea of people as objects or items. I think Fitzgerald is showing here how Daisy has almost become a mirage, an illusion for Gatsby. That idea that you sometimes see in films or cartoons where you're so dehydrated and someone or something is stranded in the desert and they start to hallucinate an oasis of water or a pub or an aeroplane because of dehydration and heat stroke. You've got that here now with Daisy, I think. Now it was again a green light on a dock, so that spell has been broken, strangely or cruelly, with the acquiring of Daisy. We should also note those two references to monetary value and quantities again, adding and amount. As I say, this chapter in particular is saturated with that kind of language. On to chapter 6, and we have this beautiful moment of analepsis, the correct term for a flashback in a narrative. Lots of stuff in blue here, of course. Out of the corner of his eye, Gatsby saw that the blocks of the sidewalks really formed a ladder and mounted to a secret place above the trees. So this is recalling that autumn, one autumn night 5 years before, is the exact quote from chapter 6. And it's Love's Young Dream. It's the young J. Gats and Daisby getting together for the first time and their first kiss. Beautiful romantic language, a very lyrical, musical sort of prose style used here. But what we're seeing is this kind of metaphorical exaggeration. The blocks of the sidewalk really formed a ladder. So if we're looking at social mobility here, and we'll look at this when we look at Daisy's character in the women video, it's not so much who Daisy is, it's more the social mobility she represents. In the video on the presentation of women, it almost sounds like Gatsby is falling in love with decor and lifestyle of the higher social classes, more so than he is with the flesh and blood woman called Daisy Faye. Very strange, a love of interior decor that perhaps goes beyond sort of enjoying interior decor. Look at mounted as well, so there's gaining the height, ladder and mounted, and this place adverbial, a secret place above the trees. We see that place adverbial again elsewhere in the novel when we see the reference to above the hot struggles of the poor. So that desire to climb out of poverty or not enough wealth or money to satisfy desire and demand, as if anyone in this novel is satisfied, whether they're rich or they're poor. Interesting use of symbolic levels here as well in terms of social mobility. Interesting adjective of secret place there as well. Secret place if he climbed alone. There's that idea of opportunity here and realising a secret or rare, unique chance at social mobility. Certain critics have read The Great Gatsby in terms of a colonial impulse, the first person to find and discover and to colonise and take ownership and control as their own, much in the manner that imperialists or colonists would find, for example, the African continent, the American continent, and claim it as theirs, Britain and the Empire and stuff like that. So there is that sense of quickly find, quickly control, and quickly seize, so no one else can have it. And that's why I've put this next quote in yellow. If you remember, yellow is materialism with a sense of rivalry. So once Gatsby has attained this woman who represents higher social mobility, once there he could suck on the pap of life, gulp down, so suck and gulp the incomparable milk of wonder. You get an idea of gluttony there. I have found a rare source of enjoyment, sustenance, pleasure, objects to be acquired and consumed, and there's this gorging on it. So in terms of Daisy, Gatsby has found her, Gatsby has claimed her, and Gatsby is going to consume her, so there's nothing left for anyone else. Interesting sort of feeding language here. Another quick example which perfectly illustrates this competition and this sense of superiority and defeating rivals from Tom Buchanan. There's sport for you. I'd like to be out there with him for about an hour. So there's more competition. He's an ex-sport star, of course. But look at his shameless self-promotion of how unique he is. I'm the first man who ever made a stable out of a garage. Okay, so attention, superiority. He's peerless. There's no one else who comes close to him. Rivalry, rivalry, rivalry. Chapter 7 is obviously that chapter full of crackling tension, heat and rivalry. And Nick here on Daisy. This equally will be useful for our video on the presentation of women. She's got an indiscreet voice. It's full of... I hesitated. Her voice is full of money, Gatsby said suddenly. And then this sort of epiphany, that was it. I'd never understood before. It was full of money. Then you get more of this kind of siren imagery, the reference to a high, so being high in a white palace, the king's daughter, the reference to that social mobility we saw earlier, climbing of ladders and pavements above. The ellipsis here, the ... is also linked towards the drinking and the oppressive heat. So Nick is sort of phasing in that consciousness here and describes Daisy as the golden girl. So in the video on the female characters, we'll look at all these epithets used. Grail, the golden girl, the musical, moneyed voice, etc., etc. She is a desirable object from a monetary point of view. This quote also recalls Jordan Baker's line in chapter 4 as well. A brilliant line that we'll look at elsewhere. Jordan wonders, perhaps Daisy never went in for amour at all. And yet there's something in that voice of hers, ... So it takes about 3 more chapters, to clarify that and have a character arrive at what is the something in that voice of hers. And quite fittingly, it's Gatsby with Nick who clarifies that and comes up with an answer. Her voice is full of money, the golden girl. Reinforcing that sense of female objectification and a glamorous trophy for the men to compete over, defeat each other, and win or secure. Here's where we start to see illustrated and exemplified that idea we mentioned previously. The fact that the rivalry between the two men and the victory that each man seeks is arguably more important to them in terms of their desire and satisfaction than life with Daisy. So look at the rivalry on show here. A really brilliant chapter full of friction. A bit of dialogue from Gatsby. She never loved you, do you hear? He cried. She only married you because I was poor and she was tired of waiting for me. But in her heart, she never loved anyone except me. So look at how important it is here to crush his male rival, his rival in love for Daisy. Then we get Daisy's reaction. Just wanted to zoom in on the language of amounts again. You want too much. I love you now. Isn't that enough? So language of quantities and amounts again. And then we have Tom's retort, his comeback. A common swindler who'd have to steal the ring he put on her finger. That's quite ironic from the man who legally, admittedly, spent his inherited money, $350,000, on that necklace we mentioned earlier, to seemingly clinch the deal, or to seal or guarantee Daisy's hand in marriage. So again, not that much difference. Just a quick note on that idea of rivalry between the two male figures here. I want to quickly mention a theorist called René Girard, who comes up with this notion of triangular desire. I think I'm correct in saying that this literary theory was first expressed in relation to 19th century novels, but the principle applies here. And the idea of triangular desire is that you have A and B, who are two male rivals, competing for the affections or the love or the hand in marriage of C, the female. And what Girard argued was that the woman in the equation, or the literary character in the book or the novel, almost becomes irrelevant. It becomes more about the power contest on this part of the triangle here, the rivalry between the two men. So if you want to be sort of absurd and comical about it, you could replace the woman, C, with anything. A chocolate eclair, a maraca, or just nothing. She almost becomes irrelevant after a while because the desire to beat your male rival and win in competition and victory becomes the driving force behind many of these literary characters. So there's a little bonus extra if you wish to do more research on René Girard's notion of triangular desire. Moving on to the scene where the Buchanans are back together and Gatsby is on a lower level, symbolically looking up at them in their window. So the sort of symbol of the window as a barrier. Gatsby is excluded from his supposed one true love, and she is returned back to the safety and the wealth of old money in the form of Tom Buchanan. Yet again, there's that repeated gesture, almost a sort of character motif, reminding you of the poor origins of young Jay Gatz, as he stands there with his hands in his coat pockets. So I walked away and left him standing there in the moonlight, watching over nothing. So even though it's nothing, that is still the language of amounts there. Gatsby is lost. Despite the wealth he has accumulated, he has lost his grail, or the goal he was pursuing. She is returned to her husband, and he is left empty with nothing. Interesting sort of insight into Daisy's psychology here. She wanted her life shaped now, immediately, and the decision must be made by some force of love, comma, of money, comma, of unquestionable practicality. Very interesting juxtaposition here. So give my life meaning, give my life shape, make my decision for me, decide, stop me wavering and wondering. And that force of love, of money, obviously very interchangeable in the novel. Impossible to separate the two. To the point where the notion of love is entirely questioned in terms of how much it is saturated in the concept and the pursuit of the force of money. The other yellow moment here is quite interesting in terms of America and the self-made man and the land of opportunity and the social mobility. See the context video. Jay Gatsby, in quotation marks, they're not mine, they're from the novel, had broken up like glass against Tom's hard malice. So there's the fabrication, there's the identity, there's the brand, the branding that Jay Gatz has made for himself, the pseudonym, the other identity of Jay Gatsby. is now in pieces, had broken up like fragile glass against Tom's hard malice. So the party is over. The construct the other self he's made to appeal to the consumer, Daisy Faye, in pieces. Still, though, we see in green, he has had this obsessive 5-year quest to attain Daisy. He's lost her, he's failed, he has not succeeded, but still he cannot let go. He couldn't possibly leave Daisy until he knew what she was going to do. He was clutching. There's that idea of reaching and just out of reach, above, beyond, in the distance again, clutching at some last hope. So there's that struggle for which he's never destined to gain or attain. Okay, an extremely busy moment here from Chapter 8. This takes a lot of unpicking, so bear with me. So I'm going to explore the blue stuff first, relating to social mobility. The reason being is that I've read this many times, and it still strikes me as really, really strange. A lot of people approach The Great Gatsby as a love story, then they see money, and then they see the notion of love is cheapened. So I think this is a really effective moment in demonstrating this. So she was the first nice girl he had ever known. He had come in contact with such people, but always with indiscernible barbed wire between. Beautiful house, but what gave it an air of breathless intensity was that Daisy lived there. Ask yourself in this next section, is the young J. Gats in love with the flesh and blood person who is Daisy Faye? Listen to this next bit to answer that question. There was a ripe mystery about it, a hint of bedrooms upstairs, more beautiful and cool than other bedrooms, of gay and radiant activities taking place through its corridors, and of romances that were not musty and laid away already in lavender, but fresh and breathing and redolent of this year's shining motor cars, and of dances whose flowers were scarcely withered. I had to take a massive deep breath reading that, with this kind of hysterical outpouring of love towards features of lifestyle of the upper classes. So look at the nouns here. Bedrooms, mystery, an abstract noun. Activities, abstract noun. Romances, abstract noun. Let's look what else. Fresh and breathing, redolent of this year's shining motor cars, dances, flowers. Where is there any reference to a woman called Daisy? The things that Gatsby is enamoured with, are all items of lifestyle. You'll recall in previous moments we've zoomed in on the word advertisements and how they promise and offer and tantalise you with items and goods from a higher social class. That level of games console, that's the highest one you can't really afford but still want. This is what Gatsby is in love with during this moment. In between that, we have a sense of defiance and determination. Because of his lowly social status, he was at present a penniless young man without a past. He took her because he had no real right to touch her hand. I guess it's the equivalent to those people who, if they go to Buckingham Palace, I think the Beatles once famously stolen an ashtray from Buckingham Palace because they were 4 young working class lads from Liverpool and they were in the Queen's house. So right, I'm going to take something. This is not my usual social circle that I operate or mix in, so I'm going to steal something. And then we have Daisy, a sense of security. He let her believe that he was a person from much the same stratum, layers or levels as herself. He had no comfortable family standing behind him. And then we get back with further blue comments here on lifestyle again. The wicker of the settee squeaked fashionably. So again, look at your nouns again. Settee, porch was bright. The freshness of many clothes So these are items of lifestyle. Sure, Daisy starts to appear a little bit more towards the end of this quote, but if you count up the number of times the nouns of items are used compared to the proper noun of Daisy, I think you'll find an imbalance here. Very strange and curious mindset. Okay, let's look at our green comments now in relation to desire. For me, this is the clearest articulation of everything we've said about desire so far up the top. He found her excitingly desirable. Okay, very interesting in a psychological point of view, albeit these aren't real people, they're characters in a piece of fiction. From that phrasing, I think you can explore the idea of desire itself being the thing which causes excitement, or excitement is the thing which causes desire, to use a sort of paradoxical way of speaking. So it's desire itself which is the sort of buzz or the addiction here. He found her excitingly desirable. Not she was desirable or I desire her tremendously. I am excited, this is Gatsby, by the desire she arouses within me. So we mentioned the idea of triangular desire earlier, where the person who is desired almost becomes irrelevant and immaterial. It's the pursuit of higher social status and social mobility, which is the thing which motivates and excites Gatsby here. We've seen how the thrill of the chase and the pursuit is exciting to him. I'd put that second and put Daisy Faye third, or possibly even lower, compared to the excitement caused by desire itself and the excitement caused by the chase and the pursuit of an object. For me, they're the top two motivators in the psychology of this character. Further on down, we have that very, very usable quote in terms of objectification. But now he found he had committed himself to the following of a grail. So, depending on your faith and your outlook and your perspectives, the grail is supposed to be an actual thing, a concrete noun, the cup that Christ drank out of at the Last Supper. But this notion has entered sort of culture and mythology as a mythological quest. A quest for anything that is hard or elusive to find. So it becomes more abstract. Your grail quest for happiness or satisfaction or contentment or love or fulfillment or the perfect job or whatever that could be. The notion of a physical grail definitely becomes more abstract, and that relates to what Daisy is towards Gatsby. He's actually pursuing a lifestyle, not a person. And finally, our yellow comments here relating to materialism and competition. Her house, we see this lifestyle idea again. It amazed him, not her, not she. The pronoun becomes third person, impersonal, not related to a person. It amazed him. The house, not Daisy. Looking a little bit lower as well here, it excited him too. There's exciting appearing again. That many men, language of amounts, had already loved Daisy. It increased her value in his eyes. We've mentioned rivalry and what's truly important. I don't want to repeat that too much. I probably have already. Moving on. So he made the most of his time. He took what he could get, ravenously and unscrupulously. Recall that earlier flashback of climbing and gulping and sucking, greedily devouring so no one else can enjoy it. And he took Daisy one still October night. So you got this sort of ravenous and greedy consuming here. Take what he could and go. Then you also get she vanished into a rich house, into a rich full life, leaving Gatsby nothing. Now we've just seen that word earlier when he's gazing up at the space where Daisy is because she's not next to him anymore. Interesting sort of cyclical patterning there. She goes and he's left with nothing when he's a poor J. Gats. Now he's the rich, great J. Gatsby. Same. Okay, so it's a cyclical journey, starting with nothing and ending up with nothing. He felt married to her, that was all. Not exactly a glowing endorsement of marriage here, but this is a novel where we see that marriage and pledges of fidelity mean nothing in a novel full of adultery. Her porch was bright with the bought luxury of starshine. I've stood on a few porches in my life. I can sadly never claim to say that, oh, this is a porch full of starshine. My life is complete. But this is what it means and embodies to the socially ambitious J. Gatsby. Okay, Gatsby was overwhelmingly aware, and then we move on to Daisy, gleaming like silver. So Grail, silver, the golden girl, voice full of money, very useful bank of quotations in relation to Daisy, and what she is to others, okay, notably her male rich suitors and competitors for her hand in marriage. Finally, a few quotes on Rags to Riches. This fits in nicely with AO3 in context. This is Maya Wolfsheim to Nick regarding the late or the dead J. Gatsby here. He was so hard up he had to keep on wearing his uniform because he couldn't buy some regular clothes. Interesting little insight this late in the novel, now Gatsby is dead, of his Rags to Riches origins. If you look here, that idea of consuming again, he ate more than $4 worth of food in half an hour. Consumption and consuming, link that to the idea of sucking and gulping on the pap and the wonder of life. Did you start him in business? I inquired. Start him? I made him. I raised him up out of nothing. And if you look here at this exploitative sort of language, I knew I could use him good. So in Fitzgerald's version of America in the 1920s jazz age, people are exploitable commodities. People are to be used in sort of self-promotion and self-preservation, and to increase one's own finances. You'll recall T.J. Eckleburg, the oculist, who put up a billboard to quote-unquote fatten his practice in Queens. Everyone's on the make. Everyone is driven by the acquiring of the greenbacks and the dollar. From George Wilson, excited from when Tom appears with the prospect of a sale of a car, right up to Maya Wolfsheim and Gatsby looking to acquire and obtain wealth. And finally on this video of these 3 language areas, we're looking at chapter 9. Here's the late J. Gats's father talking to Nick. And we notice here that Nick observes that his pride in his son and in his son's possessions was continually increasing, language of amounts again, and now he had something to show me. Lots of satire underneath that. It's that old saying of what good is your wealth to you when you're gone, or you can't take it with you. So why would Gats's father, beg your pardon, have pride in his son's possessions now that his son is dead? Okay, you can have a sort of retrospective sense of pride and accomplishment. This is what he achieved, but what good is that to Gatsby? Now he's dead and he failed in his pursuit of his supposedly one true love. Very sort of critical, satirical questioning of the whole notion of materialism there. Okay, so quick reference to the green stuff here. We've just another reiteration of Tom's restless eyes. We've already discussed the ran over Myrtle like a dog. Then we have Nick's take as he says goodbye to the Buchanans, or certainly in terms of Tom. They were careless people. They retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness, or whatever it was that kept them together. I think at this stage of the narrative and how this line occurs so late in the story, we've been invited to reflect precisely on what keeps them together. Money is offered up as a first candidate there into their money or whatever, so money is undoubtedly part of that, but it's also the security, the kind of preserving wealth. So here we have an adulterer and someone who has killed another human being, a violent adulterer, and Daisy, who has obviously been responsible for the death of Myrtle. nothing happens. There are no repercussions. We can't know if there's any guilt because the narration stops there, and that's the limits of our first person narrative perspective. We get it hinted at here. So as we've mentioned, Tom appears to be going to buy another pearl necklace. That's confirmed just slightly earlier up as well, highlighted now on the screen. Nick notices Tom frowning into the windows of a jewellery store. So that sort of implies, what can I buy? What purchase, what material item can I acquire for Daisy, which is going to help massage her guilt and any sense of trauma she may have, or to stop her looking elsewhere, to yet again put a collar or a leash around my acquisition and my item to secure and hook her as mine. Moving down to the bottom here in terms of the green stuff, the very famous ending of this brilliant novel. So yet again, in discussions of desire and obtaining goals, we have that idea of unobtainability, something which cannot be reached. However, there's a cruel sort of paradox which Fitzgerald notices here, something getting towards a comment on the human condition maybe, but certainly a savage critique and a cautionary tale in relation to the American dream and all it promises. So we have here, Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning... Okay, so we're seeing the idea that each day we get up and we seem to forget that the thing we chase is elusive and cannot be reached. So the promise of a brand new day, or each brand new day, that's okay. We'll try a little bit harder today, and today might just be the day when we reach that unreachable item or object. Look at your comparative adjectives. We will run faster, stretch out our arms farther. So this perennial promise of what we pursue can be reached, and we have that renewed optimism each day. Perhaps Fitzgerald is questioning whether we ought to be so naive and gullible and continue striving with a renewed sense of optimism. And then we have the ending. So we, mankind, people like Gatsby, we are Gatsby according to this, that inclusive pronoun. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. So there's another cruel paradox of desire, I think. What we are looking for as we move forward in the present, looking at the future, we're actually trying to obtain something that has happened long ago and obviously cannot be recovered. But we seem to think it is ahead of us and can be reached and attained, when actually it's already gone. Very tragic, elegiac ending to the novel, but a brilliant ending. Okay, well done for making it to the end. A very lengthy video. Hopefully you've digested that in pieces and stages rather than in one sitting. Hope it's really been beneficial to you. If it has, please tell a friend. Please add some subscriptions, or even better, add some likes and comments. Let me know I'm not just talking to no one here. This is obviously split into two. There is a language part 2 video, which I promise will be shorter. And if you haven't already, please go back and check the contexts video to put this language analysis into context. And have a quick look at the shorter form and structure video to give you the complete picture. Please add your subscriptions. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.